I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
And together we are going to bring you an hour of For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a program where we talk about the environment, we talk about ecology, we talk about how it affects your wealth, your health, your happiness, and your family. And we've got a really good show lined up for you this week. We have an old friend coming back, Diane D'Arrigo from NIRS, Nuclear Information Resource Service. We've got Eco News. We've got our letter from the future. Of course, we're going to hear from our fantastic sponsors after that, at about the bottom of the hour. But I wanted to start out talking about a little personal problem of mine. Well, actually, before I get into that, I just wanted to say that, you know, as I've said for the past couple of weeks, when we do the show in the studio, because right now Rebecca and I are both at home coming to you via the internet. But when we do the show in the studio, you know, you get in there and you're walking down the corridors and the scent of incense is in the air, and you walk past the little office where the station has the licensed practical massage therapist set up that you can go after the show and get, you know, kind of decompress in there, and you think, you know, I'm on my way to do something really important, and unfortunately when you're home alone in your living room, it's hard to get that sense, that feeling of urgency that, you know, that this is something big we're doing. So I am in a suit this week. It's just a pinstripe. It's not a super fancy suit, but it's a nice suit. And,
oh, Joe, you've let us down again.
What? Why? Because of just a regular
you wanted
suit?
the tuxedo. Yeah.
I can't do the tuxedo. All right, I'll do the tuxedo again next week.
Okay.
But this week it's a very nice suit. Okay, I've gotten a lot of compliments on this suit. If you could see me in person, I think you would not be, you know, so down on it, Rebecca.
Okay.
All right. But I am a little down this week, actually, maybe a little bit off my game because, unfortunately, you know, I talk about how the environment and ecology affect your health and your wealth and your family's health and wealth and so forth. But we often forget that, you know, pets are included in that when you talk about your family's health, because pets really are a part of the family. And unfortunately, my wife and I lost our pet, our little beagle, Molly Brown, this past week. We had to take her to the vet and have her put down because she had carcinoma. And that is the third dog we have lost to cancer in the last 4 years. And it's depressing. It's sad. We should not be losing pets to cancer. That's not I don't consider cancer being sort of a natural way to go. Yes, there's been cancer around forever. The dinosaurs had cancer as long as there's been multicellular organisms, there's been cancer. But the rate at which we're losing friends and family and pets is not at all natural. The cancer is becoming much too large a issue in all our lives. Have you lost a pet to cancer? You can call in at any time at 866-240-1065 during this hour. This is the best show in the Ohio region, but it gets better every time you call at 866-240-1065. So we lost Molly. We're very kind of sad, still sad about it, but it got me thinking about cancer, and it got me thinking about this concept of exponential growth. People, it's become clear from comments I see on social media, from statements made by, people like presidents of various countries, that there's a fundamental lack of understanding of the idea of exponential growth. People say, oh, look, there's not even as many people dead from COVID as there are from the flu, blah, 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 that we shouldn't be taking this seriously, get back to work, go party with sick people. Exponential growth, it's a mathematical principle. Basically, it just means that the amount of something increases exponentially, which means it gets multiplied every time there's a cycle around. So I have decided to do a little demonstration here during the show, and what I have is, imagine if you will, I have these robots, these drones, and they're going to, every minute of the show, they already started back at minute 1, they dropped 1 quarter on my desk there. And in minute 2, they dropped 2 quarters, and, so forth. And now we're at minute 8 of the show. And so, by doubling the number of quarters they're dropping each time, they started out with 1 8 minutes ago. This minute, they put 128 quarters on my desk. 8 inches tall, weighs about 1.5 pounds. And, they're going to keep doing this all through the show. I've already got the hole in the roof and the cement foundations added to the house. So I'm just going to give you updates as we go along during the program, just how many quarters we've got there in this exponential growth curve of quarters that we've got going.
You should crawl under the desk, Joe.
What?
It's going to become dangerous. You better get under the desk.
Yeah, well, no, these quarters, they're specially designed, the stack will not fall over. So It's just going to keep going straight up, out through.
See, I didn't know that because we're not together in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, if you could see it for yourself, it's obvious.
Right.
No, don't. I've taken every safety precaution.
Oh, good.
I'll be okay. Don't worry. All right. So, but exponential growth. I mean, this is something that happens with cancer cells. Cancer cells grow exponentially. That's why they take over the body and make huge tumors. And it also happens with atomic bombs. As a uranium core in an atomic bomb explodes, what happens is each atom shoots off 2 neutrons. Each of those neutrons hits another atom, and then those atoms shoot off 2 more neutrons, and so there you get that doubling, 2, 4, 8, 16. Up into the trillions of neutrons and trillions of atoms, and that's why you get an explosion. And so it's there in blue-green algae in Lake Erie when they have the algae blooms, and it's there in locusts. We're going to be coming back to the locusts a little later on. But it's something that it's vital that everybody understands what exponential growth means. That's why all these scientists, all these health officials, when they see that COVID-19 or some other disease is having exponential growth, that's why they go pale. That's why they start shaking and getting nervous, because if you understand the concept of exponential growth, then you understand that this is not something you mess with. This is not something that, like the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, who believes that the earth could survive just fine without the rainforest. He plans to pave it all over. Is actually having huge rallies and parties in Brazil, which means that Brazil is going to may soon overtake the United States in about 2 weeks as one of the hottest spots in the world where this virus, this disease is getting out. But it also shows that the earlier you can stop an exponential growth curve, the earlier, when it's still small and manageable, that's when you can prevent the whole problem. You don't have to go through the incredible plague, the incredible problems if you stop it early on. And a lot of environmental situations are like that. A lot of environmental issues are that way. Prevention is always better than trying to cure. And
See,
Go ahead.
I'm not great with abstract ideas like exponential growth, so I just think of specific friends I have who have cancer, heart disease, diabetes, or AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to happen if I spread the death crowd around? Right.
So that's like each person has that problem, but we do. It's okay. So we're 12 minutes into the show now, and so the stack is already. We've got 2,000 quarters here. The stack's already 11 feet high and weighs about 25 and a half pounds. So,
you're going to be able to do so much laundry, Joe. It's going to be cool.
Yes. You're right. Not just me, but my descendants. And, yeah.
Yes, everybody.
Probably I could give enough quarters for the whole human race to do laundry.
Yay! Clean underwear for all.
But this is how it works. Just 12 minutes ago we had 1 quarter, and now we're at 12. So now, yeah. So, yep, it's growing. It's growing high, so that's the theme for this week's show, is this exponential growth. And hopefully we're going to have our guest joining us soon, Diane D'Arrigo, calling in, talking about the COVID virus in the nuke industry, and also about some terrible nuclear deregulation that Trump is trying to sneak in the midst of this crisis. So Rebecca, how have you been?
Not too bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting to me. I don't necessarily go out that much, but it means a lot to me to have the option.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Great.
Fighting a little blues that way, but the dog gets me out twice a day, so that's nice.
Yeah, we've been going out quite a bit too. We've been walking, and actually, Carol and I are actually losing some weight. We're walking so much.
Cool.
Not sure what that means about us, like in terms of not being able to stay in the house together for that long. But
nobody can. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm reassured, Rebecca. Yeah, and it is nice to be getting out. It is nice to be going out and seeing all this, all the natural stuff that's going on, and seeing the flowers. We were on the Slippery Elm Trail the other day, and we saw the trout lilies are blooming. Do you know trout lilies?
I'm guessing they look sort of like lilies.
Yeah, they're this tiny little flower, but they're really elaborate. They look like intense. If you could blow them up, people would be selling them on street corners. They're really, really beautiful.
Cool.
They're called trout lilies because the leaf is speckled. The leaf is green, but it's got these speckles on it, like a brook trout or something like that. So, but the flower is this really elaborate yellow flower with all kinds of curls and swirls, and I'll put a picture up on the YouTube version of the show when I do that. And always remember, if you hear something you want to go back to on this show, or if you miss a show, you can always go to our YouTube channel, or you can go to our podcast on Podomatic.com. And all the episodes are there, all the brilliance and wittiness that Rebecca brings to bear on the show, and our fantastic guests. We've had some incredible guests on this show, not the least of whom is Diane, who we're looking forward to hearing from shortly. Rebecca, were you going to, did you look up a little bit, speaking of flowers and things, did you do a little research, as I recall, on dandelions, perhaps?
I did actually, and I've now looked at it so many times I sort of remember it.
Great.
Dandelions. I have not seen any dandelions, but they should be coming soon. And when you see them, it's important not to you can pick a few or do something to a few, but you got to leave some because they're an important food source for the bees before the other flowers come out. But you can take a few because you can make good stuff out of dandelions. You can use really kind of every part of the plant. You can make tea. You can make a coffee substitute from the roots, salad soups, and wine. You can make wine out of dandelions, and they're good for the blood and bladder and bowels and circulatory system in general, I believe. So if you're bored,
well, that's great.
This is a new thing you can try. Bored and over-caffeinated, go for the dandelions.
Oh, keep going, Rebecca.
Sorry, that's pretty much all I've got. Is Chernobyl on fire? I thought I heard something about that.
Yeah, the forests around Chernobyl are on fire.
Okay.
Yeah, and those forests are full of radioactive isotopes. That's why it's abandoned. That's why it's a zone where humans can't live. And,
right.
That is spreading a new cloud of radiation all over Europe. And, the forests around Chernobyl, one of the things that the pro-nukers do is they paint those forests as some kind of Shangri-La. They paint them as a paradise. They say, oh, they're full of wildlife. And they're just, showing that there's no real problem with radiation. But as we know, there have been extensive studies, and that illusion, there is a lot of wildlife in those forests, but it's all dying. It's dying constantly. What's happening is new populations are moving into the radioactive areas, and they last 2-3 generations, but the cumulative effect of all the birth defects, the cumulative effect of all the mutations and genetic diseases will wipe out that population after 2 or 3 generations, and then another moves in. And so it's an illusion that it's a very sick forest that looks like a healthy forest because animals keep moving into it, and it's pretty much a straight line, as we've expected. It's a straight line dose. The more radioactive the forest, the fewer animals could live in it, and the shorter time for these cumulative genetic diseases to wipe out the population. And, it applies to humans too. I mean, it applies to every animal. None of us are immune from the genetic damage from radiation. So, it's a big problem. And of course, the problem is firefighters can't go in to fight it because it's radioactive, and they would be inhaling radioactive smoke at close range. So, if they tried to go in and fight it, they would almost be guaranteed developing lung cancers and other problems. So, it's terrible.
I heard that just kind of alluded to very briefly on the news, and then they went back to talking about COVID-19.
Right. I know there's a lot of things that they're just sort of touching on or ignoring in order to completely pummel us with this COVID-19 information, which is important. Don't get me wrong. I am not saying don't take COVID-19 seriously. Quite the opposite. Oh, and speaking of which, let's see, we're at minute 20. So now we have 65,000 quarters piled up here at a height of 376 feet. That's almost half a ton of quarters, piled up here in my living room. The drones are already, I can't even see them anymore. They're already above the roof. They're piling it on way above where I could see them. So, and don't worry, I have some faster than light drones. They'll be able to, keep the pile going all through the whole hour of the show.
Okay.
So I just, as you were telling us about dandelions, I gave Diane a call, and she's calling me back.
Excellent.
Rebecca, could you take the mic for a second?
Okay.
All right.
Alrighty. So yeah, Diane from Nears, I remember we talked to her before. Was she the one who was talking about trains? I can't remember. It might have been the thing where they're trying to put nuclear waste on trains, and every 5 minutes for 10 years a nuclear train is going to come through Toledo, and you know how the stop trains are in North Toledo, it's going to be bad, especially for North Toledoans, and East Toledoans especially. No jokes about East Toledoans, but yeah, they're pretty badly irradiated. Gosh, my dad and stepmom lived for years on the east side for I think 10 years, and during that time they lost 2-3 cats to cancer, as I remember, including one they got from me, which was upsetting. And now they moved to the south side, and they're losing cats. Their cats are living to be older and sometimes dying, getting run over by cars instead. So that's good.
Well, that's a better way to go than cancer, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
There's no good way to go, but cancer sucks. All right, Russell, Diane says she's been trying to call in at the 866-240-1065. And if she's not getting through, I'm going to have her call me back on my phone, and I'll just put my phone on the mic. All right. Wonderful. Diane, thank you so much for joining us here on For a Green Future.
You're welcome.
Okay. Before we get started, Diane, I want you to know that what we're doing on the show today is we're trying to demonstrate exponential growth. And so I might periodically announce what we're doing is we're stacking up quarters exponentially. The pile is doubling every minute. And we started back at minute 1. Right now, we're at 22. We're at 262,000 quarters. Our stack is 1,500 feet high and weighs a ton and a half. So I might mention that. So don't get confused if at some point in our interview I just start talking about stacks of quarters. So
okay.
Welcome,
Diane. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're always happy to have you on. And they say you're supposed to be calling friends and stuff during this COVID crisis to keep your sanity. So I thought, hey, I'll call Diane. And I'm just glad you're able to get on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Could you please just remind our audience who you're with, what your position is, and so forth?
Yeah, this is Diane D'Arrigo. I'm with Nuclear Information and Resource Service out of the Washington, D.C. area. I'm actually in Maryland, right on the edge of D.C. And we have been around since 1978, helping people around the country and actually around the world to fight nuclear power, nuclear waste, and to prevent radiation, unnecessary releases and exposure to people of the radiation from the nuclear power and weapons fuel chain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you asked me today to talk a little bit about... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. That's just what I was going to say. We want to talk a little bit about how this COVID-19 is affecting the nuke industry. And I also wanted to talk with you about some of the terrible deregulation that is trying to be forced through as we're all being distracted by this COVID problem. So let's get right into it. We have had someone on we had Kevin Camps on a few weeks ago talking about this, but the problem, it seems like it's getting more and more critical because they're trying to force through these refuelings even as the people doing these refuelings are getting sick. Is this what you're seeing?
Yeah, so at nuclear power reactors, in the U.S., the kind of reactors that we have and that a lot of the world has require every 18 months to 2 years that the irradiated fuel in the core be rearranged and the stuff that's been in there for a while be removed. And all this has to be done remotely. And usually when they close, and they have to close to do this refueling. And so that means a lot of people have to come in. And for some places, some reactors, it's as much as maybe 1,800 people. So you've got in some small towns hundreds, in some places thousands of people coming into town, temporary workers, and the process takes months. It can take a month to 3 months. So in places where we're all supposed to be sheltering in place or not going out unnecessarily, we're looking at small towns being not specifically invaded, but a lot of people coming in. But the people that do the refueling and the safety tests, they do this at many reactors, so they'd be going from reactor to reactor. So we've got in the range 99 reactors in the country, and on maybe about 60 or 70 different locations, and looking at teams of people going regularly to all of these different locations. So it's a potential for bringing in the COVID-19, and communities are not necessarily prepared for their own situation, and then having a whole bunch of workers come in is a concern. So there have been some calls for not doing the refuelings, at least not until after COVID. In the Pennsylvania town where the Limerick nuclear reactors are, the county health commission wanted to not have the refueling done, yet the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the utility decided to just go ahead and do it. So, and they started it up faster because they wanted to get in there before anybody could go to court and stop them or that kind of thing. The other thing that's going on, in addition to
I just want to say that nuclear refueling is not what you don't want a rush job when you're doing nuclear refueling. I mean, it's a very tricky business.
It's actually the biggest exposure part. It's the biggest exposure when they refuel. There's an annual amount of allowable release that the reactors can put off, and it's an annual limit, which is not really effectively monitored or enforced. But when the refueling is done, that's when the massive releases of radioactivity happen. It's during that phase, and that has been pretty covered up by the industry. A colleague of ours in England and colleagues in England and Germany forced that information out a few years ago about how high the releases of radioactivity are during refueling. And so that's something that it would be good to let communities know. You don't want to bring your kids out and, play outside downwind on the beach near a reactor. It's the time when the highest releases are happening. But the other thing I wanted to say about the refueling, so it's happening at the reactors. There are quite a few scheduled this spring, summer, and fall when we're supposedly going to still be having this COVID virus looming. But what's supposed to happen when they turn the reactor off is important safety checks and repairs. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been regularly exempting the utilities from doing that extra work. And it might mean that less people come into the community, but it also means that there'd be less of these workers that come in and do the work. They're trying to maybe reduce from, say, 1,800 to 1,200, but then the important work of having safety checks happen and repairs would not take place. So for perhaps another two years till the next refueling, and that's a very dangerous situation. So that's something that we're really concerned about.
Valve. Yeah, that leaky valve, that bolt that might be halfway eaten through, from some corrosion, like maybe a little bit of leaking boric acid or
the hole in the head of the
Davis
Bessie, the hole in the head of the Davis-Bessie reactor from a few years ago. I'm sure you covered that we were fractions of an inch away from a massive release of radioactivity that would have been devastating to the area around the Davis-Besse nuclear reactor and, well, the whole region. That already had been not found because they've been exempting from having to check. And so this kind of thing could be happening again at that very reactor, at other reactors. The other connection with the COVIDs and the reactors, nuclear power reactors, is that the workspace is confined and people are in the control room together, are in small spaces together doing their work. And so there's been a concern and actually a problem with COVID in those places. And the industry and the NRC are requiring longer hours so that people don't go in and out as often. And of course, that's the last thing you want to do for people who are doing important jobs like running a nuclear reactor. Make them work double the hours or stay in place.
Yeah, I'm picturing people in these control rooms with like spray bottles of disinfectant, like spraying, trying to spray down buttons and electrical, gear and so forth to keep themselves from getting sick, because we do have reports of nuclear workers. They're already getting sick. There are reports around the country of people at these plants who are coming down with COVID.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah,
and Fermi is one of those. That in Monroe, Michigan, there are. It's a high. There's a high amount of COVID-19 in Fermi, in Monroe, and people are concerned there. And it's at other reactors as well.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that a little bit after the interview, Diane. And I just wanted to mention our stack of quarters just passed 1 million. We have 1,073,000 quarters now that are it's 1,000 feet high, and it weighs almost 7 tons now. So
vending machine Diane, food is on Joe.
Yep, I got that covered. So Diane, this allowing them to go through the refueling and to sort of suspending all the rules and safety while they're refueling, that's one way that the nuclear industry is taking advantage of this COVID thing to get something they want, to save a few bucks, even though it puts the rest of us at risk. But there's other things being pushed through, sort of longer term regulations and so forth that are being proposed that they're trying to sneak in under the cover of this terrible disease. Could you tell us a little bit about some of that?
Yes, there are in not just the nuclear world, but all around, the Environmental Protection Agency, other agencies as well. The industries are moving their agenda, their polluting agendas, under the cover of COVID, as you said, to release themselves from regulatory constraints. And in the case of the nuclear power industry, one of the things that the nuclear power industry is trying to do, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is figure out a way to stop regulating radioactive waste. When you have a nuclear power reactor, you've got the irradiated fuel that we've been talking about refueling. In the core of the reactor, 10 to 14 foot long pencil thin rods, a couple hundred of those in an assembly, and then a few hundred assemblies in the core of the reactor, and then they move that fuel around and replace it every 18 to 2 to 3 years. The rest of the reactor gets contaminated. The radioactivity in that fuel leaks out through cracks and pinhole pricks into the water and circulates around the reactor, and so the reactor itself gets contaminated gases that are formed permeate the concrete, get into the concrete, and then decay into other radioactive elements. So essentially, by the time a reactor closes, and during the operation, by the time it closes, the whole reactor is radioactive. And some of that radioactivity is very intense. The fuel rods, we know, give off a lethal dose if you're exposed unshielded in just minutes, even into the future for a few hundred years. But the rest of the waste, the filters from filtering the water, the components that get activated with neutrons, so the metal that becomes radioactive, and the soil and the concrete and the plastics and all the components, they become radioactive. And it's called, in the U.S., quote, low-level radioactive waste. But some low-level waste can give lethal doses in 15 or 20 minutes unshielded. So the way the laws and the regulations work in the U.S. is that the waste is supposed to go to a licensed nuclear waste disposal site. And there are rules that licensed disposal sites have to meet in order to get their license. And some it's taken as much as 10 or more years to get a license. And the waste is supposed to go there. We have, in the anti-nuclear community, been really concerned about those radioactive waste sites not isolating waste. They're actually designed to allow up to 25 milligrams a year of exposure from that site. They can give off radioactivity. If you get a waste site in your community, you're going to get a place that is allowed to give off radioactivity. Well, that's what's supposed to happen. For a long time, the nuclear power industry has not wanted to pay the full cost, especially when decommissioning massive reactors, of sending all this waste to a licensed site. They would rather send it to a regular garbage dump.
Now, let me just say that, Rebecca, we're getting a little background noise there.
Okay.
You're not petting Kogi, are you?
Actually, no, everything's quiet here, unless I just had my phone too close to the something. I don't know.
All right. But when you say decommissioning, Diane, I think people need to know that what that means is taking all those components you described, taking all the pumps, taking all the concrete on the inside of the reactor, taking they
rubbleize the
walls.
whole reactor. Yeah. And then they crumble the whole reactor.
Right. All the internals of the reactor, that is now nuclear waste. Some of which, as you said, is so deadly it can kill you almost as quickly as a spent fuel rod. But that's what has to be disposed of, and so yeah. Go on. You're talking about now.
Okay, so I wanted to make the distinction of the high-level waste, the irradiated fuel, and the rest of it, which is called low-level, but low-level does not mean low risk. Well, now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is in cahoots with the industry and the disposal people, trying to make a new category called very low-level waste. Well, we thought for a long time, up until the rule proposal came out on March 6th in the Federal Register, that they were talking about the lowest part of the so-called low-level radioactive waste. They've got that all of it's radioactive waste, and then there are categories. They split it into concentrations. So you can have plutonium even in the lowest concentration category. And we've been fighting since the 70s, actually, against about a third to a quarter of this waste was targeted to become regular garbage and go into recycling to make consumer products and building supplies. And that was termed BRC, below regulatory concern. Over the decades, there have been about 15 or 20 efforts by the government and the industry in the U.S. and around the world, but mainly in the U.S. is where we've been fighting it, preventing this deregulation or release of radioactive waste from the requirements to go to those licensed facilities or to be managed in a licensed radioactive way. Well, now the proposal for very low-level waste allows the waste to go to regular garbage dumps, to hazardous waste sites, and anywhere else that is authorized by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with specific exempt. So it's the regular garbage dump near the reactor or anywhere applies to the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, one time for a specific exempt license, and a one-time analysis is done of the kind of waste that would be able to go there. So let's say it's all of the concrete from dismantling the nearby nuclear reactors, or let's say it's the soil that's contaminated, or let's say it's portions of the components. The new dumps that would be able to take it, they do not have a license for radioactivity. They have a specific exempt permission from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to take this nuclear waste. They can take it from then on. And in the analysis, the one-time analysis they do, they are allowed to, from their site, give off 2.5 times more radioactivity than the licensed nuclear waste dumps.
Oh.
Wow. So we are talking here about everything, probably not the irradiated fuel, probably not the portion of the high-level waste that gives a lethal dose unshielded. There's a small portion of that, but there's still a lot of very serious radioactivity. So we're talking about sending the nuclear, as they dismantle these, as they are cleaning up during normal operations, sending the waste rather than to a licensed repository that has been a licensed so-called low-level radioactive waste dump. They're potentially going to be able to send it to any old dump. There is zero ability for the public to know if your landfill is going to be applying for this.
Contaminated.
You won't know. There's
Wow.
no provision for the state, other than the agreement state officials, if you're in an agreement state, to know.
And
there's no possibility for input or intervention.
And if it turns out your local dump starts leaking radioactivity at higher than the insanely permissible levels, no way to find that out, and no way to go back and revoke one of these licenses?
The allowable level will give cancer to 1 in 500 people.
Wow.
And that's using the the standard man. It's not, so women and children are more likely to get cancer from radioactivity than males. So we're talking about higher risks.
Is that the allowable level for the licensed or the now proposed unlicensed? When you say allowable level, you mean, is that for a licensed nuclear waste repository? Or is that these new ones?
It's the same amount. 25 millirems per year is the amount that operating reactors are allowed to release, that closed reactors are allowed to release decommissioned and cleaned up sites. They're released, their license are terminated when they can say that they've cleaned up down to 25 millirems. So now they're saying that other sites, perhaps landfills, can be that contaminated.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's terrible.
And they're calling it very low level. So there's a comment period up until July 20th. I'm still putting together an alert, which I will make a note here to make sure you get, so that you can share the ability for people to. People can comment right now to the NRC. The way that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a lot of the agencies take comments is under www.regulations.gov, and then the way to find this rule is VLLW NRC. There was a search. You can search for Nuclear Regulatory Commission, VLLW. And what I'm saying is, that's a real nuke speak thing here, is that not only are they calling it very low-level waste, but they're encompassing in that term all of the so-called low-level waste. And as I described a few minutes ago, even that can give a lethal dose, unshielded. So it's a real, to act like we're talking about a few scraps of something that are hardly radioactive and it's hard to tell, and we don't want to ship it off to a licensed place. We want to send it to the regular trash. Well, that's already happening at reactors. They make a distinction. They've got their waste streams that go to regular garbage from, the parts of it that are supposedly not contaminated, and then the actual radioactive parts of the reactor. What they're talking about now, potentially the whole reactor going into regular trash. And so it'll make it a lot cheaper when they have to dismantle.
Quick and dirty, a lot dirtier too. Well, Diana, I'm afraid we got to move on in the show.
Okay.
But thanks so much for joining us. If people want to follow this, if they want to, see what you guys are up to, how do they get a hold of you?
Diane D at nirs.org is my email, and www.nirs is our website.
All right. Thanks so much, Diane, for joining us.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
All right. So that brings us to minute 47, and we have 8,800,000 quarters stacked up here. The pile is now 9,579,000 miles high. It's well beyond the moon, and yeah, that's a lot of quarters. But they're continuing to grow exponentially. That's the thing.
Are they going to bump into the sun and cause trouble at some point?
Actually, the sun, they're going to reach the sun in between minute 47 and minute 48. So
won't they melt at that point?
No, they're not heading directly for the sun. They're going to.
Oh, good. Oh, they're in the other direction. Okay, just so you aimed it right. Yeah.
No, yeah, they're heading out of the solar system, not into.
Oh, good.
So. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're very careful about that when we set this up. So.
Right.
All right. So now it's time to hear from our sponsors. The 4 Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. And that's where you can get updates. And we actually got an update from them. It turns out that the walleye run, basically Buttonwood Park, has been canceled because they had people coming in from all over the country, potentially bringing COVID here to Northwest Ohio. So the Wood County Parks closed their parks for fishermen this year, which is really sad. If you want more information, you can also go to their website, wcparks.org, and download their app, WC Parks. Just go to the App Store and search for WC Parks. And one nifty thing about that app is that you can put pictures in there that you can take on the trails and at the parks, and you can just put them there for other people to enjoy. I actually did that with some nice pictures of trout lilies and another nice picture. If you go to the app, you will see them. Our show is also brought to you by our sponsors, who have signed up on Patreon, and every month they get a small amount of money taken out of their checking account. You determine the amount, and you just give them the information, and it doesn't hurt. There's varying levels of membership, and you could find a membership that will fit your budget. If you wanted to do a membership at the dog level of membership in memory of our puppy Molly Brown, Carol and I would be extremely grateful for that. But we're extremely grateful for all our patrons at whatever level they're supporting. We couldn't do the show without them. So that's patreon.com, and you just search for A Green Future. All right, already 8:50. We got to rush through here. 8:50, and so that means we now have, let's see, That's 56 billion quarters, or 562 billion quarters. The stack is now 613 million miles tall. And the weight is, it's so many zeros, just lots and lots of tons of quarters. So, but that's how exponential growth works. You start out small, and then you just keep doubling it, and then it's like an explosion. So we're getting into the last minutes of the show here, so these amounts are going to increase by mind-bendingly fast. They're by mind-bendingly huge leaps in the number of quarters we got stacked up here. All right, eco-news. Real quick, as you might remember, we had a guest on the show last week, Tom Henry, the environmental reporter from The Blade, and he has reported this past Thursday in The Blade, he has a story, Virus Strikes Furby 2 Nuclear Plant During Refueling. Restart still expected in weeks. And unfortunately, most of this story is reassurances from the nuclear plant company, Detroit Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission saying, hey, it's fine. They can work sick. Well, it's 103 fever. That's not a direct quote. That's, I'm sort of interpreting what they're saying. But they refuse to give numbers on how many are sick, how seriously ill they are. They refuse to talk about, exactly what they're doing to protect the remaining workers, because frankly, it's almost impossible to protect those remaining workers. So that's something, as we just talked to Diane, okay, Rebecca, what have we got going on there?
Okay, my assistant co-host is becoming agitated and feeling like he's not getting enough attention. I may just. Okay.
I see. We may have to take his
himself.
collar off during future shows. just a word of advice there. So here we are being put at risk by the nuclear industry yet again, just for the sake of saving a few dollars, when the ironic thing is they could be making more profit. They could be making more money and charging us less if they were putting up wind and solar instead of trying to keep these insane, expensive, dirty nuclear plants going. But I think we've pretty much covered that for this cycle. Just an interesting eco story that I came across, and that is they have figured out how quickly whale sharks age. They've, always had a lot of trouble with that. They knew they were big, they knew they were old, because they had these growth rings on their vertebrae, but they didn't know how often those rings got put down. It was like one ring 6 months, is it a year? Is this whale shark 50 years old? Is it 100 years old? Is it 150 years old? And the whale sharks have been very mum about their age. I mean, you ask them, they just won't tell you. So they found out a way to definitively define how old whale sharks are, and the way they did it is very interesting.
Hello again.
Yeah, hi. They used the atomic bomb pollution from the 50s when they were doing open-air nuclear tests. And what those open-air nuclear tests did is they doubled the amount of radioactive carbon in the air. Carbon-14, that's a radioactive isotope of carbon, for those couple of years. And so they went back to these whale shark vertebrae, went through, and they found which rings had double the amount of radioactive carbon. And they realized, okay, well, this ring was put down in 1958. And so now they know how quickly whale sharks age. And but, of course, the interesting part of that story is that those nuclear tests from all that time ago doubled the amount of radiation that from carbon-14 that organisms get and are still getting, because carbon-14 takes a long time. You need 10 half-lives, about 300 years before it goes away. So putting radioactive pollution to work for science, I thought that was interesting. And then another story that we said we were going to talk about that I really don't have time to go into in a lot of depth, but it's another example of exponential growth. and that is that there is a plague of locusts going on in Africa. And the cause of this plague is ecological. What happened is that they have had unusually high amounts of rainfall in the desert, which sounds like a good thing, but that makes perfect breeding territory for these locusts, these desert locusts, which normally live solitary lives, except, of course, at mating time. But when they get to plant a lot, when they get to hatch a lot of their eggs, when they get to have a big population, that population changes its behavior, it changes its color. They almost become a different species, and they group together instead of trying to stay isolated from each other. And then they go off and they fly hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, and they will literally eat everything in their path. They'll eat trees down to nubs. They'll eat the wood off of buildings. They'll eat every single growing plant, and so right now it's because it's exponential growth, because of the cool, the damp weather in the desert. All the eggs of the first generation are surviving, and it looks like they're going to get 3 generations in this year, which means right now there's a cloud of locusts larger than New York City, flying all over Africa, eating everything in sight. So,
just what they need.
Yeah. Speaking of exponential growth, we are at 9 trillion quarters, and so we are out beyond the sun, and we're out into the outer reaches of the solar system with our exponential stack of quarters. Okay, 8:57, show's almost over. Time for the letter from the future. It's another sad one. Dear GGG, so tired. Have to write one word, then stop and rest. Told you last week, lost the baby. Was visiting Michael's lab. He was showing me the new drill tube. Then, tremendous crash. Room shook, tools fell off shelf. Michael looked at me and ran towards the crash. As soon as he left, I started feeling nauseous. Headed back towards my room. Started throwing up in the hall. Lost the baby halfway back. Passed out, woke up in the hospital in Zapolyarny. Remember, we had a shipment of the radioactive waste come in a rail car last year. It was a huge concrete and steel container, one end screwed off like a giant thermos. They were opening it to take a sample to test the waste with the new alloy. No one noticed the end cap was slipping off its rails. It fell, and the gamma radiation shot out of the end of the rail car like a flashlight beam. Michael's lab was in the path of that beam. So were others. Michael used a crane to lift the cap back in place, but 2 workmen who helped him have died. I have no hair. I've lost 30 pounds. Michael is sicker than me. Bye, GG. G. Love, Marie, I. So.
Boy. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for Marie until next week.
Right. All right. And so, until next week, this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And signing off.
The sun don't give us all we need to make this country run, but that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!